last news item. Do you have any kind of final thoughts? Like, we went through the Wednesday night ratings right as we got them on the Hangout on Thursday. From reaction you've heard from people, or just your own thoughts on Wednesday night? Because I think it's a really interesting story when you look into the demographic breakdowns and kind of what this reveals.
Yeah, really. I think on the outside, you look at that NXT number and, it only dropping maybe 11% from the week before. But I think the bigger story is the difference in demographics in 18 to 49 between AEW and NXT, and how NXT had a third or double? What was it? What were those numbers?
Half. Yeah, it was half.
They had half of what AEW had, and also the 50 plus number. I mean, to me, the end result really feeling like this was factual indicators that WWE has attracted an aging demographic, whereas AEW, at least for their first show, has been able to attract a young audience that isn't watching these other shows. So I think, this experiment of like WWE trying to counter their rival or upcoming rival has really kind of backfired. And if anything, it's kind of been shown that they are sort of an older product.
So, some of the things I found really interesting when I was going through the numbers today, and this was pointed out obviously, but in that 18 to 49 demo, like AEW did a monstrous number in comparison to NXT, but in all of these demos, like, it's not like NXT lost people from last week. They were identical from last week in 18 to 49, and you go through them. I mean, they were even in people 18 to 34. They were actually up 15%. Females 12 to 34, NXT was up 42% from last week. The one demo where NXT was really down in, the only notable one they were significantly down in, was over 50. They were down 25%, and that was the lone demo where they just squeezed out AEW. So I really wonder if perhaps like the wild card game kind of affected the over 50 viewership, and maybe they're going to get a bounce back next week. But how valuable is the over 50 audience in this battle between these two? Like, this tells me there's a much younger audience that's watching AEW, and it's not a huge amount that you're taking away from the existing NXT viewership. Like, AEW is taking off a small amount of the NXT audience, but it's much larger of a fan base they're either bringing back to wrestling or they've created. And that, to me, is something that you don't just come up with a game plan for next week that we're going to put Triple H on TV and suddenly this is all going to reverse. It's like they have built something here, and I think that AEW has a pretty solid foundation that I don't know if NXT necessarily does one or two little tricks to try and chip away at.
Yeah, and I wonder what those tricks would even be that would kind of like be able to attract a younger demographic. Clearly, like, I think a lot of the characters that are on NXT are, I would say, very kind of youth friendly, but like, clearly it's become not just, an issue of characters or, I don't know, even like style of wrestling that has made the difference. So what do you think it is? Is it something like being the elite? Is it, who knows what else? Are people just, kind of tired of WWE? And they want to try this other wrestling that has a different set of initials on it.
And how many people are just they kind of look at AEW as kind of this like mission statement, like this, like they're very much invested in these guys and what their story is, what they're trying to do, and it's maybe it's appealing to a more broader fan base out there, and also a younger fan base as well that they've been able to bring here, but. How do you react if you are NXT? Like, are you, if you're assessing these numbers and you've had 24 to 48 hours to process it, and you're sitting down and weigh, what are we doing wrong? Or are we staying the course till we see a more of a pattern emerge rather than being super reactionary after week one?
I think so. I think, first week numbers, you can definitely, expect to be a bit more skewed, but this was the wide margin that I don't think they even expected. I don't think anybody really expected. So, I'm sure like they're coming up with game plans, but I think none of those game plans should really be concrete until maybe after next week's numbers come out as well. I feel like NXT, to me, you mentioned like, these relatable stories of like the AEW crew and the Elite and how that could possibly be, I think, something that's made the difference for them. To me, I think NXT's best bet in terms of like, characters or people that like the audience just absolutely loves and wants to support no matter what. To me, that's Johnny Gargano and Tommaso Ciampa. So, I feel eventually when you get back to those stories, I think those guys might be the key. But that's just my opinion. Maybe AEW is just that big of a juggernaut. But again, this is also just the first week. Can we really, say that much after 1 week?
Yeah, I think that if you're NXT, I don't think you have to. Like, I think long term, it would be very detrimental if they made enormous changes to NXT, because the last thing you want is for this program to bleed into Raw and SmackDown, because I promise you, if that happens, they will erode the foundation you have. And that is something you don't want to ultimately cost yourself. Like, that to me is the attraction of watching 2 more hours of WWE produced television. It better be different, because I've got more than enough between the 5 hours that bookend the week now. And I can see them going to the well when it comes to this week. Roman Reigns is showing up on NXT. I can see that being like the first go-to is guest appearances. The second one is obviously
would hate that. That's my opinion. That's what I.
That to me is just that's in their playbook. And like, to me, the most fascinating reaction to all of this is we know how Vince McMahon reacts to these situations, but this is Paul Levesque's problem. And how does Paul Levesque handle this right now? Because he's been in a position where his company, NXT has been very insulated. It's not like we get week-to-week numbers of NXT on the network. Now it's all out there. And does he fall into the trap that he was very much a product of that Monday Night War, where it's an ego thing that we got embarrassed and now we've got to win the week instead of looking at this long term? Like, publicly, he's saying all the right things. Is he actually going to implement that? And after 4 or 5 weeks of this, what's he going to be saying? What is he going to be looking at? Is he going to be perceiving himself that I'm failing at this? I need to make enormous changes. So I think seeing Paul Levesque in this leadership position, how he handles this, is going to be very fascinating if this is a trend with AEW winning. And I don't see next week being any different than this week. I think AEW is going to get enormous publicity out of this win as the hot new cable show. And I think that they're going to come very close. I think that they're going to maintain their audience. And if they're higher next week, it's not going to shock me, because there's going to be a lot of mainstream outlets that are writing about this show that has sort of come out of nowhere for people that don't follow wrestling, that what is this thing? And look at the numbers that they just did on TNT. I think there's going to be a lot of coverage of them.
That is true. That is true. Now, I would say most of the people that you and I spoke to that watched the show would agree that the NXT that they presented on Wednesday was a better in-ring show than what AEW presented on Wednesday. Does that matter at all, do you think? Do you think that there are people that sampled AEW and said, you know what, this is not for me. I prefer what I see on the other channel? It's
a factor. And it's, I saw a lot of people that came away with AEW enjoying it, but not thinking it was a home run. And I'd agree with that. Is that enough that that's going to not bring people back next week? It's certainly a question to ask, but I think overall, if you were asking me which show would you rather be presenting, I think that NXT could take a lot from AEW, where it felt like the bigger show, quote unquote. And I don't know if just putting out killer matches for 2 straight hours is going to attract more people than what they've got at the moment. Like, you're servicing an existing fan base. Are you going outside of that and bringing people in? I mean, and the other observation as well is that was an enormous outing from NXT, whereas AEW, I mean, it's not like they threw everything, including the kitchen sink, on Wednesday, and NXT cannot come back with a show like that, whereas AEW, I think they can largely maintain like what they put out this past week. It was not like this blow away, throw everything out there kind of show.
It was not, but I mean, let's also, not neglect the idea of the curiosity on that first episode. That will
Yep.
dissipate. So I think, the onus is certainly on AEW now that they know that they have all this audience that's watching and caring about what they're doing. Now it's the onus is on them to impress and make sure that those people stick around. To me, that's the challenge now. Not just stick around, but to increase that number going forward.